At the moment, I'm researching for an article for Top Tyrol, and I'm trying to understand better the connection between China and Austria. Maybe the region of Tyrol in Austria, the connection between Tyrol and China, mostly about the economic connections between the two regions. And maybe my first question for you, Chating, is that Tyrol might seem like a small player at first glance, but regional partnerships with China, like the sister region with Henan, like the China Center at the Managerial Center of Innsbruck, they are growing, the connections, the partnerships. How would you assess such cooperation from a geopolitical perspective? Because we are here in the West, and at the moment there's a huge economic conflict between the USA and China. And what are your perspectives on this theme?
Okay, thank you, Max. Thank you for having me. I think China's foreign policy has primarily focused on the United States. It's very US-centered. But the strategic competition between China and the US has become inevitable. This is placing China under immense pressure. To reduce this pressure, China needs to build a united front against the United States. This is a long-standing tradition of the Chinese Communist Party, CCP. And the first generation CCP leader, Chairman Mao Zedong, once said, this is a very famous sentence, politics is about making as many as friends as possible and as few enemies as possible. As a closed ally of the US, the EU is a target that China is striving to win over. However, progress has been limited in both Brussels and the capitals of EU member states, as a fundamental difference of ideology and value persists between the two sides. Europe views China as a systemic rival. Additionally, there are geopolitical tensions between China and Europe, with Europe dissatisfied with China's position on the Russia-Ukraine war. In this context, China has chosen to focus its efforts at the subnational level of EU countries rather than EU level and national level. These efforts primarily focus on economic and cultural fields, thereby effectively avoiding the ideological and geopolitical conflicts between China and the EU. It can be said that this is a fairly clever strategy from China's side. So this is my answer to your question. I'm not sure if I have answered your question.
Yeah, thank you really much. Another question maybe is Austria was for a long time was a key hub for the connection between the West and the East, and especially Vienna has long been to a Chinese investment hub in Europe. The first Soviet connection in Europe was with Vienna, 1968. In the last few years, this role is changing, given also the geopolitical tensions between China, US, and the EU. What is your perspective on this changing world order? How do you see Vienna or Austria as a country which is part of the EU, but has also this special role between the two big centers, USA and China?
Yeah, and to answer this question, I think we have to record history. During the Cold War 1.0, the main battlefield of the US-Soviet rivalry was Europe. Austria was able to keep its neutrality despite being in Europe. But in the Cold War 2.0, the main battlefield between the US and China is Asia, or the so-called Indo-Pacific region. Given the fact that Austria is far away from Asia, it's more likely that Austria will maintain its neutrality. I think being neutral is beneficial to Austria, as choosing either side in the US-China rivalry would alienate the other, thereby harming Austria's national interests. As long as Austria maintains its neutral stance or even adopts a friendly attitude toward China, China will reciprocate with more investment. Hungary is a clear example of this.
Maybe to talk a little bit more about that theme. So you say Hungary is an investment hub at the moment of China. They are investing huge sums in Serbia, in Hungary. The role of Austria isn't so important for China at the moment, like Hungary. Is it changing?
In terms of economic investment, I think right now Hungary is more important than Austria. As far as I know, over the past years, China has invested a lot in EU countries like Germany, maybe France, but now China is shifting its focus of investment to Hungary because Hungary has a very good relationship with China.
Does this also connect to the Belt and Road Initiative? Because your work on the Belt and Road Initiative is recognized. You are writing a dissertation about that. What role does Austria play in the BRI, strategically or symbolically?
I think BRI is a very important foreign policy of China, especially in the field of economic cooperation and development. The most important goal of the BRI is to connect China and Europe, especially Germany, because Germany is the largest economy of Europe. I think the goods arriving by sea at the port of Piraeus in Greece, which is Chinese managed, can be transported to Hungary, where the China-built Hungary-Serbian railway. Should Austria join the BRI, it would enable the transportation of goods from Hungary, where Austria to Germany. In this sense, Austria can play an important role in the BRI, both strategically and symbolically. The BRI is not only an infrastructure plan, but a broad economic and cultural cooperation initiative in which Austria can play an important role in many areas. But due to the growing geopolitical tension you have mentioned and the ideological confrontation, right now the situation is becoming more and more complex from my point of view.
And you talked about the benefits for Austria, but where do you see the biggest risk of a small country or small European countries like Austria, like Hungary, like Serbia, in navigating those relationships with China? Is there the possibility of being too dependent on China, or how do you see this?
Yeah, of course. This is a very good question. I think economic cooperation brings benefits, but it has risks too. The biggest risk is unilateral dependence from my point of view, as China may use economic tools for political purpose. For instance, China imposed economic sanctions on Lithuania due to China's anger over Lithuania handling of the Taiwan issue. I think in the future, China might use its economic tool again if Austria's policy toward China is not friendly from China's perspective.
In your work, you combine geopolitics with real-world economic effects. Are you observing recent trends with regards to Chinese investments? You talked a little bit that the investments in Hungary and Serbia at the moment are really important. Other industrial corporations in Europe that you are seeing?
I think electric vehicles are a strategic industry the Chinese government is actively promoting. And Europe represents a profitable major market for China. In order to rapidly enter the European market, China is making significant investments in Europe. I have mentioned Hungary due to its pro-China stance and the status as an EU member state. Hungary has secured substantial investments from China, such as those from BYD and CATL. BYD is an electrical vehicle manufacturer based in southern Chinese city, Shenzhen. And CATL is a battle manufacturer. It's a giant battle manufacturer. From my point of view, the relationship between China and Europe is not only defined by economic cooperation. Actually, economic competition between the two sides is intensifying, with Chinese companies increasingly emerging as formidable competitors to European companies, particularly German ones. In fact, China is more likely to become Europe's economic rival rather than that of the US, because the economic complementarity between China and the United States is significantly higher than that between China and Europe. Of course, the geopolitical competition between China and the United States is greater than that between China and Europe. So this is my view about the economic cooperation between China and Europe.
And you touched a huge problem there. I think it's a huge problem in the relationship between the European Union, especially Germany, and China, are both markets who are hugely export-driven. Also, Austria is an export-driven country, but the biggest trade deficit of Austria, for example, is with China. The same with the US, where Trump is talking about the trade deficit with China. And where do you see points where one could start a relationship between Europe, Germany, and China when both countries want to export huge amounts of goods? You touched a little bit on it, but could you talk a little bit more about the possibility of a fight between Germany and China to be the production hub, to be the export leader in the modern world?
Yeah. This is very important for Germany, and European countries. In the past, there was a complementarity between Germany and China. China was a huge market for German companies, but now the situation is completely different because Chinese companies are becoming more and more powerful. Let's take electric vehicles as an example. China has a very strong EV industry now. BYD has sold much more electrical EVs in Europe than Tesla. And the car industry is very important for German economy. So I'm afraid that Germany will lose the competition between China and Germany in the field of electrical vehicles, because China has tremendous advantage toward Germany, right? So in the past, China and Germany are economic partners, but right now, in my view, China is becoming a very formidable economic competitors of European countries. I'm not sure if you know Made in China 2025 strategy. Actually, the most industries of Made in China 2025 are also the key industries of EU countries. The competition between China and Europe is intensifying.
Yeah, I saw that the battery company ATL that you talked about is also working together with Tesla and BMW, I guess ahead of the German car companies. Is there a fight between Chinese companies against each other, or is it that CATL and BYD and the other car companies are still competing more with the German car companies, or is there also a fight in China between the companies? Are they competing on same markets? I don't know. Maybe another field, another industry where Shein and Temu. You talked in the last podcast about it, that they are competing against each other. Is it in the EVs industry? Is it the same?
Yeah. First of all, BYD is a car maker. BYD is an electrical vehicle maker, and CATL focuses on battery. So this is the difference between BYD and CATL. But on the other hand, the competition in Chinese domestic market is very fierce. BYD has a lot of competitors. You can imagine the survival of Chinese domestic competition will be very powerful because the competition is so fierce, right? So I think BYD has survived, and BYD is very powerful. They have established a huge factory in Hungary. I think they are trying very hard first to enter European market and then dominate the market. We have seen BYD has sold more electric vehicles than Tesla.
Another question for you. You talked about the BRI and that the main goal is to connect with Western Europe. But I read that at the moment, the focus on the Belt and Road Initiative is more in Central Asia, Africa, South America. What's your stand on this? Is the main goal to connect China, mainland China, with Western Europe, or with developing countries in South America, Central Asia, and Africa?
The original purpose of BRI is to connect China and Europe. But in order to connect China and Europe, you have to pass through Asia, like Central Asia, West Asia, or Russia, right? So you have to build the infrastructure between China and Europe. The final objective of BRI is to connect China and Europe. Because both the Chinese economy and the European economy are very advanced. If we can connect the two advanced economies, there will be a lot of benefits. But in order to achieve that purpose, you have to invest in the countries between China and Europe. And the scope of BRI has been expanded radically, you're right. Originally, BRI should focus on Central Asia and Southeast Asia, but now BRI has been expanded to the entire world, and China has realized the scope and the scale of BRI is too ambitious to control. Now, I think they are more careful. They are trying to change the strategy of BRI. They are promoting small and beautiful projects rather than large-scale infrastructure projects. So this is a change.
And you worked in the telecommunications industry, right? In my research for the article, I found out that A1, the biggest telecommunications company in Austria, is working together with ZTE from Shenzhen and Hutchinson from Hong Kong. And they are working together for huge projects in Europe and developing the smart city infrastructure and 5G. And do you know something about that, or how do you see the telecommunications market in Europe?
I know ZTE. ZTE is a telecommunication company in Shenzhen. And in Shenzhen, there is a much larger telecommunication company, which is Huawei. I think Huawei is well known. ZTE and Huawei are competitors. They always compete against each other. Hutchinson is from Hong Kong, I know. So you have mentioned the telecommunications industry. I think in all the countries, telecommunication is very important, probably strategic industry, okay, very important. In the past, there is very good cooperation between Chinese companies such as Huawei and ZTE with European telecommunication carriers like Deutsche Telekom, France Telecom, British Telecom, Vodafone, Telefonica, and so on. They only focus on business. That's why the presence of Chinese telecom companies in European continent has grown tremendously. But now it's no longer pure economic matter. because telecommunication industry is very important. It has implication for national security and digital sovereignty and so on. Right now, the environment is becoming more and more difficult for Chinese companies. For example, Huawei has been banned by many European countries like France, like UK. Many other European countries have banned Huawei. Germany is still thinking about the decisions. They have not made the final decision yet.
Why do you think Huawei was kicked out of the US, of France, of Great Britain? Do you think that it's in their national interest to do so? Or, yeah, what's your point?
I think the root cause is very complicated and not only one reason. There are economic reasons, there are political reasons, there is also ideological reason. First of all, Huawei is a powerful Chinese company. They want to harm Huawei as an economic competitor. This is understandable. This is economic reason. But the national security reason, I think the concern is not baseless. If you are talking about national security, I think today the network is very important, much more important than previously. For example, the war in Ukraine, we can say the importance of drone. But how can you control the drones? You have to have wireless communication network, 5G and 6G maybe. If the telecommunication network is controlled by Chinese company, I think the Western countries are really varying the possibility. That's why they want to ban Huawei. So this is the consideration of national security.
And maybe some guesses. I would like that you take some guesses, because at the media summit you talked about how you think the tariff war is playing out in the next few months, and you were right. You wrote it on LinkedIn that you did the right guess. What's your guess now? How do you think does the tariff war between China and the US is developing after this 90 days? How is it playing out in the next future?
I don't know. But I think the US will definitely increase the tariff against China, because the US federal government has limited power, so they have limited tool to compete against China. I think Trump has limited choice. Tariff is his favorite choice. He has to use tariff to compete against China. China is different because Chinese government is much more powerful than US federal government. Chinese government has much more tools in competing against the United States. I'm not very optimistic that the negotiation will reach a final solution. But I think both China and the US have advantage and disadvantage. I think Chinese economy and the Chinese people are very resilient. It's not very difficult for them to bear the cost of tariff war. But the United States, the situation is very different. United States is democracy, right? I'm not confident that the American people are willing to bear the cost of the tariff war. I think Trump will have a very hard choice between tariff war and his popularity inside the United States.
Really, now the last question. And what does that mean for Europe, especially for small European countries like Austria? What's their role in this tariff-driven world where sometime in the near future, the West, especially the US, will capitulate in some sort against the Chinese? how would you position as a small European country, as the EU? Do you think they're doing a great job by trying to negotiate with both sides? What's your perspective on German car manufacturers? When you say you see how the Chinese companies are really powerful, they are dictating, let's say, their way to the German car companies. What's the solution for a German car company, except of capitulating against the Chinese companies?
I think the situation is very difficult for European industries, especially for German car industries, because the Chinese competitors are really powerful, formidable. I think Germany must work harder, and they have to take action quickly. They have to invest in tremendous scale. I think Germany has realized the problems and the challenges, and the new German federal government is acting very quickly, especially in foreign policy area. I have seen Chancellor Friedrich Merz has visited many different countries. He is taking action. But for the economic policy right now, I have not seen big progress. I think in the near future, the situation for Germany and Europe could be very difficult, because the United States is launching a tariff war against the EU as well, and China is no longer a huge market, but also economic competitor. So the situation for Europe will be very difficult. I'm not very optimistic. I think Europe, especially Germany, must act very quickly.
Okay, thank you, Chao-Ting, for your really interesting perspectives. I guess I learned a lot about this topic.
Thank you, Max. Thank you for your interview.